Hi, class. Welcome to chapter 10. And please, before we start that, uh, most likely it's going to be look at the e-learning side of Google Classroom. There will be assignment also, and it's due next week. So I look, and it's a group assignment, same like we did in the old one. So I look forward for your feedback and your submissions of assignment of not this week, like the one we are doing now, like the week after. Okay, thank you very much, and I will make that announcement, the due date exactly when and what you're supposed to do there. Thank you very much. So let's start with chapter today's chapter. Okay. So in today's chapter, what we're going to be talking about is we will be talking about the monetary, the global money system, how it works. Now, the international monetary system is basically the international monetary system refers to the institutions arrangement that countries adopt to govern exchange rate. So if you're buying something or selling something, you need from outside the countries, you need to pay in their currencies or or your currency, and you have to exchange these currencies as exchange rate. So one Canadian dollar equal with a point seven something American dollar. So if you're buying something in the USA from USA, you have to do this exchange rate. And the exchange rate is according to the demand and supply of currencies is influenced by their respective countries, relative inflation rates and interest rate. We will be talking about more details. If you take in economics with me, you will understand much better what is this. But in this case, all you have to do is you look at the currency supply in the market is like another product. There is demand and supply for it. There is also other things that influence the exchange rate is the inflation, how expensive the products is going in that country, and the interest rate if it's a high or low. It's not affecting the demand for and supply of currencies uh, in the market. Now, when the foreign exchange market determines the relative value of a currency, we say that is adhering to a floating exchange rate regimes. The exchange rate for converting one currency into another currency adjusts depending on the law of supply and demand. In the free market, um, according to the law of supply and demand, the rate of the price of that currency changes. So let's assume that if there is too much currencies of Canadian currency, too many dollars in the market, there is a high supply and there's a demand is low, so the price of the Canadian dollars goes down. If it's less, then the demand for the Canadian dollars goes high. So this is will cause the price of dollar go high. So why it goes less and the demand fluctuate and demand and supply. The reason is for the international trade, whether you're doing a product, service, or something. The country, for example, Canada, when they are selling oil or selling product or a service, they demand the Canadian dollars. So somebody who's buying their products, they have to go and buy from the market the Canadian dollars to pay them. Now, to do that, if there is a limited Canadian dollars, the price goes up. And if it's lots of Canadian dollars, the price of the dollar goes down. It's just a regular supply and demand law. That's in the free floating one. Now, in the international monetary system, we all know there is a four major trading currencies. The biggest one is the US dollar. That comes in the European Union, the euro, Japanese yen, and the British pound. They are all free floating against each other. So you see them, they go up and down against each other. Their exchange rates are determined by the market forces and fluctuation against each other. So they are all depend on whether the market determine the prices of these products. Now, what we have other definition, which is something called a pegged exchange rate. The rate at which currency value is fixed relative to a reference currency. Let me give you an example. UAE dirham is always considered to be fixed, but fixed their rate is fixed relative to the American dollar, not to everywhere or other currencies. So the American dollar, if it goes high, the UAE dirham goes high. And if American dollars go down, UAE goes down. Now, um, there is other countries who do it pegged to two currencies or three currencies or basket of currencies. And that's it's different. We will talk about it later on. But this one, pegged exchange, is when the Canadian American dollars goes high, UAE dirhams go high, and if it goes low, UAE dirhams goes low, because they deal with um, level of availabilities of their, according to the U.S. dollar. Now you have what you call a dirty flow system, which is countries who allow to have their currency goes high to certain level or low to certain level. After that, they interfere with it. So in other words, a system in which a country's currency is nominally allowed to float freely against other currencies, but the government will intervene and start buying and selling currencies if it believes that the currency has driven too far from its fair value. In best example, you would see the Canadian dollars, they trying to keep it at around zero point 0.8 to zero point 0.7 price to American dollar. But if it goes a little bit higher, then they will try to dump more Canadian dollars, so the price goes down of the dollar. If it goes lower, then they will, take some from the market, the Canadian dollars, so it goes higher. So they are allowing in a certain um, level floating. Higher than that, they will intervene. Lower than that, they will intervene. So it is afloat because in the theory, the value of the currency is determined by the market forces. But it is a dirty float as opposed to a clean float because the central bank of country, as we said, will intervene in the foreign exchange market to try to maintain the value for its currencies if it's depreciated too rapidly against the important reference of currencies. So if the Canadian dollars goes really low, that will hurt the economy of Canadians because then it would be less money in flow because the dollar keeps going down. Things get very expensive, foreigner goods. And if it goes really high, more than zero point 0.8, for example, then you would see that Canadian a product of Canadian product outside becomes very expensive, so people will have less demand. So this is why they keep it in a certain level. Now, what we have is something called every country has something called central bank. A central bank is a generic name giving to a country primary monetary authority such as the Federal Reserve System in United States or Bank of Canada in Canada. Every country has central bank, but they named it differently. Central bank is a generic name. Now, if you look at it, central bank is a bank for all the banks. So if you have so many banks, say like TD, RBC, BMO, all these are banks which is in Canada. They have one bank, which is these banks banking them in it. So that's called central bank. A central bank usually has the responsibility for issuing currencies, administrating money policies, you know, because we took in fiscal policy, monetary policy, so they are administrating it, holding members' banks' deposit. So as we said, it's a bank for all the banks, and facilitating the nation banking industry, putting the industry, the laws, the rules, the regulation, how other banks works, supposed to work. Now we have another body called International Monetary Fund, or IMF. IMF will explain it later on. It's a bank for international giving money to or countries. One criticism that the IMF is a one size fit all approach to macroeconomic policy, inappropriate for many countries. They have a one straight policies, like their policies that they other countries see it inappropriate sometimes. It's not customized. The critic argue that the tight macroeconomic policy imposed by IMF are not well suited to countries that are suffering, not from excessive government spending and inflation, but from a private sector's debt crisis with a deflationary undertone. So, as you know, sometimes the government may be borrowing so much money or spending too much money, and sometimes the problem is not at that level. It could be at the private sector level, which is there is a debt crisis. The private companies or private sectors have lots of debt and might be lowering their prices. So it's not necessary when a country have a problem. It's on a macro level. It could be on the macro level of government issues. Could be on the macro level of um, private businesses. But IMF, what it does is really looks at one thing, always macro level on the government, how the government's supposed to solve the problem. More about the IMF. The final criticism of the IMF, International Money Fund, is that it has become too powerful for an institution that lack of any real mechanism or accountability. You will see that there is no accountabilities, no rules and regulation. Suddenly they try to help this country, but the next country, which is a neighbor, because politically incorrect or they're not interested in the following the mainstream, they might not get the support from them. So there is no accountabilities in the real mechanisms there. Now, the purpose of IMF is really to lend foreign currencies to members to tide them over during the short period of balance of payment deficit. So let's say, for example, Greece in the old days, they had a shortage of balance of payment. So what they're paying um, due to the trade, importing things more than what they're getting from their export. There is balance of payment deficit. So they're giving them in the short term some money, foreign currencies, so to balance that. Because if they don't have money to pay, it's very hard for them to import. So the IMF comes and lend them for them to import. In order to receive such money, currency must abide by certain regulation and economics restriction. As we said, IMF can be very selective and help certain countries politically influence than other countries. That's one thing. The second thing, when they lend these countries, they will put some rules and restrictions on them. The World Bank organization is not one silent entity, but rather a group of five institutions of their own world. Now we spoke about IMF. Now we're speaking about the World Bank. The World Bank is not one single. It has so many things around it. The World Bank Group consists of five associated institutions. One is called IBRD, or the International Bank of Reconstruction and Development. The activity mostly of most interest of to people in international business. IDA, or International Development Association. We have IFS, which is International Finance Corporation. We have MIGA, which is Multilateral Investment Guarantee Agencies. And we have ICCID, which is International Center for Settlement of Investment and Dispute. Each one has different rules and responsibilities to cover. If you have a free time, you might go in each one and see how they do work. Now, back to the fixed versus floating exchange rate. Fixed exchange rate, monetary policy, I'm sorry, um, fixed exchange rate. There is, in the fixed exchange rate, there is a monetary discipline. Like, they keeping the money uh, pegged or fixed money. So when it's the, as we said, there is not much demand for them, for their currency, they go and buy their currencies. When there is a lots of demand, they produce more currency, so they keep it fixed. There's some speculations in it, so they look at it whether it's going up and down. They do that. There is uncertainties because they might uh, get shortage of keeping that fixed. So there is uncertainties, and there is a trade balance adjustment, which is, as we said, if there is an export more than import, you see that there is a tendency of their currency goes higher and higher because everybody wants to buy their currency to pay for them. So they will cut short on the trade balance adjustment. Then you have the floating exchange rate have two main elements, which is monetary policy autonomy, semi-autonomy. Well, yes, autonomy probably. That the money goes up and down according to the market, and there is automatic trade balance adjustment. So the currency, as we said, goes high, there's less demand for their product, and people buy less from them, and vice versa. Now, exchange rate regimes in a practice. Government around the world pursue a number of different exchange rate policies. There's a 21% of the IMF members allow their currency to float freely. Another 23% intervene only in a limited way, which is the floating, or can the managed float. And 43% use more flexible system, including fixed pegged arrangement. So almost half of the countries kind of use fixed exchange or peg against certain currencies. Under a peg exchange rate regime, a country will be pegged the value of its currencies to that of a major currency, so that, for example, the US dollar raises in value, its own currency raises in value. And we brought the example of dirham in UAE, where they peg it against US dollars. Pegged exchange rates are more popular among many of the world's smaller nations because they're not into that big the word of exchanging. So they just peg it against one country so they can focus on keeping their rates stable. Now, then you have the currency board, which is a country that introduced a currency board, commits itself to converting its domestic currency on a demand into another at a fixed exchange rate. Very few countries like they do that. Is like Switzerland, and probably Kuwait does that, and I believe Bahrain. Kuwait, what it does, it commit itself not only in US for US dollars, US dollar, British pound, euro, and they say we are willing to supply you as much as you want if you want to demand our Kuwaiti dinars or demand one of these currencies. We have all these, and we will be keeping the amount of the Kuwaiti dinars, which is the highest in the world, at this level. So, guarantee that if you have any request to convert, they will convert these list of the currencies to another currencies as a currency board or called basket money. Now, there is a different type of financial crisis. There is what you call currency crisis, occurs when a prospective attack on exchange value of a currency result in a sharp depreciation. Like what's happening in some countries like Venezuela, Iran, there is an attack on their currencies and sharp depreciation in their currency. There's what you call also a bank crisis, referred to a loss of confidence in the banking system, like what's happening in Iraq, for example. The first one, Iran, this one in Iraq. People don't trust the banking system, so there is a banking crisis. And what do you call the foreigner debt crisis? What's happening in Greece is in the situation which a country cannot service its own debt obligation, whether a private or a government. This in Hungary and also in Greece, they were not able to pay their debt. So that's what you call foreign debt crisis. Evaluating the IMF policy prescription. All IMF loan package come with a condition attached to it. Um, until very recently, the IMF has insisted on the combination of tight macroeconomic policies, including cuts in the public spending, higher interest rate, and tight monetary policies. See, all these, and they're not talking about corruptions, for example, government corruptions. So the government might be borrowing money and due to some corruption, spending it on something else, and people of that country have to pay that. But here, what they're looking at the tight macroeconomic policies, they're looking at the cutting in the public spending, making higher interest rates so people borrow less, and making a very tight money policy, which is sometimes is unacceptable for countries. Now, there were sometimes it's when we said this policy doesn't fit everybody, so they might be very inappropriate policies for certain countries. One criticism that the IMF traditional policy prescription represent one size fits all. You cannot put all these rules to one country. Approach economic policy that inappropriate for many countries. Some countries, you know, they are taking that money because they want to spend on the people to, for example, on education. Now they tell them we'll give you money, but don't spend people on people education or something like, for example, or something like that. So they are giving one size fits all. Now there is a moral hazard, which is a second criticism of IMF, is that rescue effort of exacerbating a problem known as economics as a moral hazard. So what's a moral hazard? Moral hazard arises when the people behave practically because they know they will be saved if things go wrong. So if you get the money and you spend it, you know the bank can give you more. If you have money now and you spend it, you know the bank will give you more. So there is a moral hazard and you become irresponsible as a country. There is a lack of accountability. The final criticism of IMF is that it has become too powerful for an institution that lacks of any real mechanism for accountability. There is no accountability. Sometimes, as we say, they give this country because for a certain political reason and not giving to another country, which is probably stands for a better economic conditions. So there is no accountabilities. But overall, they also have helping lots of countries. We have a tendency of forgetting that the good part of IMF, but there's lots of bad part also. So this is the end of the chapter. Please look forward to answer your assignment as a group. Thank you very much, and bye bye.